So let's talk about your example
Right.
of airplanes.
Right.
You say that tort reform is necessary to free up their economic freedom and power to grow as an industry. The devil's advocate side would say that we need tougher regulations to safeguard the public safety. How would you resolve those two?
Well, I think that the tort system does have an important role to play in protecting safety. And I think what's happened in tort law is we used to base tort liability on fault, on a principle of fault, so that if you're manufacturing airplanes and you don't attach the wings in an adequate way and they fall off, and we say you're negligent and you're liable, I think everybody understands that. It's just like driving down the road and looking over your shoulder to tune in some station on your radio or something, and you crash into somebody. We all agree you're at fault for that. But what's happened in tort law is we've shifted from that fault-based concept of liability to one that's based on compensation. So the whole objective becomes to compensate injured people, whether or not the injured person was negligent, and whether or not the person who's the defendant in the lawsuit was negligent. We start focusing on who's got more resources. And so we look at airplane manufacturing companies, they're big companies, they've got resources. We'll just make them pay. We'll make them strictly liable is the technical term. You're liable whenever something you do causes harm to somebody else, whether or not you were at fault in any meaningful sense.
So how would you, what changes could fix that system?
Well, I think a lot of the fault, actually, speaking of fault, for the problems I see with the tort system really rest with judges who have been willing to gradually expand the scope of liability under traditional tort law. Because it's really, lawyers, you can expect lawyers to make every argument they can on behalf of their client. That's their job. In fact, they're ethically responsible to advocate for their client. Judges should, I think, adhere to what the law is and has been historically, and not keep expanding liability, because the expansion of liability has usually been in the direction of trying to figure out how to compensate. If we want to compensate injured people, let's not do it through the tort system. Let's have a government program to compensate if that's an objective we have. So I think we need the kind of tort reform that would be helpful would be to draw back some of the case law which has allowed the great expansion of tort liability, and also to limit the scope of liability, either in terms of pain and suffering damages and punitive damages, which have sometimes just skyrocketed and are very difficult to measure. For actual injuries, medical costs, loss of income, those kind of things, we can measure those pretty accurately. And that isn't what has caused the size of tort injuries to explode. It's pain and suffering and punitive damages.
Okay. So you would be an advocate of legislation to reverse some case law and at the same time put a cap on punitive damages?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.